Myst, Might, Mayhem. By Han Jung-Wioya. Chapter 366. Seventh Heaven. Part 1. Then, let the Master and the Spiritual Sword Sanctuary swear loyalty to me. At Mok Jayangan's unexpected demand, Master Okianmu's expression twisted terribly, incomparable to before. Until now, no matter how surprised he had been, he had tried to maintain his composure as much as possible. However, this time it was difficult to maintain it. Although he had said with his own mouth that he would grant anything desired, he never expected a demand to swear loyalty. This person truly. Master. It cannot be. At Mok Jayangan's demand, the sword disciples of the Spiritual Sword Sanctuary and the guests rose up. No matter how disappointed they were with the Master's submissive behavior, this was a completely different matter. Even if they didn't know his exact identity, everyone knew that person was a Fire Faith Order member. The Fire Faith Order was an organization suppressed by the country for the crime of deceiving the masses. Telling the Spiritual Sword Sanctuary to join such an organization was tantamount to telling them to turn against the country and the people of the Central Plains. Master, this is not right. Joining the Fire Faith Order would ultimately, whoosh. A guest who was shouting towards the Master suddenly had to stop speaking, startled by a sword hilt that stopped an inch in front of his brow. Though stopped, the sword controlled by energy still carried an aura as if it would pierce his forehead at any moment, leaving the guest rolling his eyes, not knowing what to do. Then Mok Jayangan's voice reached his ears. You've been mistaken from the start, but who said I was a Fire Faith Order member? What? I can't say I have no connection with them, but I'm not a Fire Faith Order member. What do you mean? I'm just myself. And swish. As Mok Jayangan raised his hand, the remaining 7 swords floating in the air flew around in all directions like living things, showing a threatening appearance. Feeling wary, the sword disciples and guests took defensive stances. Swish. Swish. The speed at which the swords flew around was incredibly fast. Their eyes were tinged with tension. With 7 swords flying around independently, they couldn't help but think inwardly that he was a monster. Even controlling 1 or 2 swords would greatly divide one's attention, but moving this many swords simultaneously with the marvel of sword control with energy was beyond their level of comprehension. You keep telling the Master he shouldn't do this or that, but why don't you step forward yourselves? No one opened their mouth at Mok Jayangan's provocative words. There weren't even any who rashly stepped forward. Although it looked like they were simply flying around on the surface, the 7 swords were intricately interlocked as if forming a battle formation, trapping them. If they stepped forward carelessly, they might be the first to fall. Seeing them like this, Mok Jayangan sneered. Are you really the ones who said you could give your lives for the Master? Don't you have the courage to fight unless the Master steps forward first? Would such provocation go unchallenged? A middle-aged swordsman among the guests couldn't contain his anger and shouted, trying to launch himself towards Mok Jayangan. Who says we have no courage? I, Bayong Sword Wung Song, will. Thud. Ugh. A sword controlled by energy pierced through his right shoulder. With a death cry, the swordsman who had identified himself as Wung Song fell forward, clutching his shoulder. Brother Wu. Another swordsman who was close to him tried to step forward. Then a sword brushed past his face. Hook. Thud. His severed left earlobe fell to the ground where the sword had passed. The swordsman, clutching his cut ear, froze as if turned to ice, unable to move from that spot. The same was true for the others. They thought they might suffer the same fate if they moved carelessly. Then someone shouted. We must move simultaneously. That's right. No matter how good his sword control with energy is, it's only 7 swords. How could he block us if we all move at once? Right at that moment, Mok Jayangan lightly waved his hand. Swish 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 swish. No way? It got even faster? Not only did the 7 swords fly around at a speed incomparable to before, but they also brushed past between them, threatening to cut them if they moved even a little. Just a moment ago, they thought they had found a solution, but now they were at a loss, suppressed by the aura of the swords flying at tremendous speed. To them in their bewildered state, Mok Jiangun said, "Shall we test how long it would take me to kill all of you?" Flinch. At these words, everyone's expressions hardened. Master Okianma might be able to annihilate everyone here within a quarter hour if he put his mind to it. But if that monster, whom even such a master had given up fighting, was determined to kill them, how long would it take? A quarter hour? No, half of that? Are you threatening us now? It's not a threat, I'm just telling you what's about to happen. What? As they were flustered, Mok Jiangun glanced at Master Okianmu and said, "If loyalty is burdensome, let's change the conditions, Master." What do you mean? Don't interfere with what happens from now on. Then I'll guarantee the lives of the Master and your sons. At these words from Mok Jiangun, the eyes of the sword disciples and guests trapped between the flying swords controlled by energy shook wildly. Until just a moment ago, the incident was a conflict with the Master's family. But suddenly, the sparks had flown to them, and in an instant, a knife was at their throats. Truly, the human heart was unfathomably fickle. As the life-threatening sparks flew to them, their gazes, without exception, turned to the Master. Master Okianma sighed at their gazes. Their gazes seemed to say they would resent him if he didn't help them. He's not someone I can handle. Okianmu inwardly clicked his tongue. This person was an expert at driving situations to extremes. If he had to watch their deaths helplessly because of the condition to grant any request, ultimately, he and the spiritual sword sanctuary would have to bear all this resentment. How did he end up at odds with such a devil-like person? It was truly lamentable. Swish, swish, swish. Oh no? The swords? The trajectories of the flying swords controlled by energy began to narrow gradually. It really looked like he intended to kill them all. At this, Okianma shouted, "Do you really intend to kill them?" Mok Jiangun answered without stopping the swords controlled by energy, "I told you, didn't I? This is excessive." They were merely trying to help this old man. If they tried to help, isn't this level of readiness natural? It's called meddling when you interfere without the ability to handle it yourself. They're just paying the price for their meddling. At Mok Jiangun's firm words, Master Okianma finally had to make a choice. He bowed his head to the ground and shouted, "I swear loyalty to you, noble sir." His shout echoed loudly throughout the cliff-surrounded area. Father. Wung Huang, the eldest son and junior master, couldn't hide his bitterness at his father's choice to finally swear loyalty. Although he had no choice, as a son, it was unpleasant to see his father forcibly submit to someone. But how could spilled water be returned? He had to accept it. Swish. At that moment, Mok Jiangun made a gesture of lowering his hand. Then, clang, clang. The swords that had been flying through the air lost their power and fell to the ground. The sword disciples of the spiritual sword sanctuary and the guests, freed from the threat of the swords controlled by energy, were relieved but didn't know what to do out of guilt as they looked at the Master. It was because Master Okianmu had finally sworn loyalty to save them. They couldn't help but feel sorry for this. Swish. A strange light flickered in Master Okianmu's eyes as he raised his head to check if Mok Jiangun had stopped threatening them. It was because of the gazes of those looking at him. Just a moment ago, they had seemed to not understand his choice. But now it was the opposite. Don't tell me he intended even this? Okianmu looked at Mok Jiangun. Seeing him smile slightly as he looked at himself, Okianmu felt goosebumps all over his body. What on earth was this person? He had thought he had simply driven this situation to extremes and ultimately obtained what he wanted. But it wasn't just that. Did he create justification? The sword disciples and guests, perhaps because they thought they had been saved by his oath of loyalty, showed no disappointment or dissatisfaction with this choice. It was as if they thought this choice was natural and unavoidable. This might be his true terror. The ability to move even the hearts of others at will was a frightening power. Just like Master Okianmu, who was deeply afraid of Mok Jiangun even after swearing loyalty, there was another person who viewed this situation seriously. She was Zhang Myong Sate of the Hangshan sect, dispatched as an investigator from the Righteous Alliance. For Master O to swear loyalty to someone? This was not something that could be simply overlooked. Master Okianmu was one of the six heavens, called the pinnacle of the current martial world. Even if he had lost his will to fight due to lack of real combat experience and acknowledged defeat, he was still a peerless expert of the Grand Master level who had surpassed wall after wall. Moreover, as Master Okianmu was a craftsman and sword disciple respected by all swordsmen of the Central Plains, he had tremendous influence. This is serious. That person possessed martial arts worthy of being called a new seventh heaven. For such a person to take Master Okianmu under his wing would disrupt the balance of power that had been maintained until now. I must quickly inform the Alliance headquarters. This was an issue that warranted convening the entire Council of Elders of the Righteous Alliance. Although he declared he wasn't a Fire Faith Order member, judging from his reckless actions, he was definitely not an Orthodox sect member. If he was from an evil sect, this incident could be considered an even worse outcome than the annihilation of the Namgung family's leader and their elites. But how can I find out who he is? It would be troublesome if she carelessly stepped forward and became at odds with him. As she was pondering this, coincidentally, Master Okianmu asked Mok Jiangun, "Although I have sworn loyalty, I still don't know your esteemed name. How should this lowly one address you?" To this question, Mok Jiangun answered briefly, "Qianma. Call me Qianma, Heaven Demon." At these words, Zhang Myong Sate's eyes widened. On her way here, she had heard one strange rumor. It was a story that the 108 Arhat formation of Shaolin, called the birthplace of the Orthodox sect's martial arts, had been broken by a single true enlightened one step. As it was such an absurd story, she had dismissed it as mere gossip. But she remembered exactly what they had called it. Heaven Demon's Sovereign Step. They had definitely said that. Chapter 367. Seventh Heaven. Part 2. Sizzle. Although gripped by pain that felt like burning every time Mok Jiangun's sword intent touched him, Master Okianmu didn't show any signs of pain or utter even a single groan. He merely regulated his breathing. Of course, it was partly due to his strong endurance, but it was also because of his dignity. As one called one of the six heavens, the pinnacle of the current martial world, it was difficult to show weakness in front of his children. Watching him, the second son O Wongsong inwardly clicked his tongue. He, whose arm had been reattached first, couldn't endure the pain and had screamed. Yet seeing his father's expression not changing at all, he felt both admiration and even more guilt. If I hadn't coveted that orb, would this have happened? Yes. Maybe it wouldn't have. That's why he felt even more guilty. What pained him even more was that neither his father nor his brothers blamed him. Even that youngest brother O Yianwu, born of a different mother, whom he had resented and tormented so much. That boy had bowed his head for his sake. Even his elder brother, who had been practically backstabbed by him. Drip. A tear rolled down the cheek of the second son O Wongsong, whose eyes had reddened. He wasn't aware of it, but Mok Jiangun was closely observing this. Although he had ended it after receiving loyalty from Master Okianmu and the spiritual sword sanctuary, he had been considering killing him if necessary because he had continued to create troublesome situations. But seeing his gaze and attitude change so noticeably, he felt puzzled. That is what it means to be human. Chang Ryong's voice rang in Mok Jiangun's ear. To this, Mok Jiangun replied through voice transmission. What do you mean by that? What do you think distinguishes humans from beasts? Isn't it the use of tools and the ability to think? He answered with the most decisive differences. Chang Ryong inwardly clicked her tongue and said, "Of course, there's that. But humans also change." Change, you say? Yes. Mortal, you seem to think humans are inherently unchanging because you don't trust anyone, but human beings change as they experience many things. For example, the emotion of regret would be part of that. Regret? Isn't that also a kind of learning? Don't view all emotions simply rationally. Emotions belong to the realm of sensibility. If Chang Ryang says so, then it must be. Mok Jiangnan answered with a slight smile. Seeing him like this, Chang Ryang muttered softly. And you're changing too. Pardon? It's nothing. You clearly said something. I said it's nothing. At her firm exclamation, Mok Jiangnan shrugged. No matter how much she muttered, there was no way he couldn't have heard the words ringing in his ear. Changing, she says. He didn't know in what aspect she was saying such things. He felt he was still the same as ever. Sizzle. Having successfully completed the three marvels method, Mok Jiangnan removed his hand from the wound on Master O Qianmu's severed right arm. Try moving it. At these words from Mok Jiangnan, Master O Qianmu carefully tried moving his arm. Swish. Ah. O Qianmu's eyes trembled. He had only moved it a little, but sensation returned to the arm that had been filled with emptiness just moments ago. It was truly remarkable. Although it was no longer surprising after seeing the second son O Wongsung's arm reattached, he couldn't help feeling overwhelmed as his arm moved. At this, Master O Qianmu knelt on one knee before Mok Jiangnan, clasped his hands, and said respectfully, "This old one offers thanks for the noble sir's generous grace." Thud. We brothers also thank you. Following him, the eldest son Junior Master O Wung Huang, the second son O Wung Song, and the third son, the youngest O Yianwo, also knelt on one knee and showed respect. Regardless of how it happened, they were simply grateful just for reattaching their father's and brother's severed arms. Mok Jiangnan waved his hand lightly at them as if bothered and said, "This much is only natural. I understand, so would you all please rise?" Rip. Clang. At that moment, a leather scabbard Tor and evil commandment sword, one of Mok Jiangnan's magic swords, fell to the ground. It seemed that although it was made to serve as a scabbard, it couldn't withstand evil commandment sword's sharpness and finally tore. Then Master O Qianmu, noticing this, opened his mouth with surprised eyes. "Noble sir, is that perhaps the evil commandment sword? As expected of a sword craftsman, you recognize it at a glance. There have been people who sensed the sword's demonic nature, but you're the first to immediately recognize what sword it is, sect leader." Indeed, it was rare for someone to recognize what sword it was at a glance without extensive knowledge about swords. In that sense, he couldn't help but feel puzzled that he recognized the sword's name instantly. But then, how could I not know? That sword was made by our clan's ancestor, O Yezi. How could this descendant not recognize it? O Yezi, a man from the state of Yu during the spring and autumn period, considered the greatest craftsman. The swords he made were all renowned and called legendary swords that transcended time. A strange light flickered in Mok Jiangnan's eyes. He had heard that he was called a sword craftsman to the extent that there were rumors of him being a descendant of O Yezi, but it wasn't a rumor, it was none other than the truth. A forest about 30 ri away from the spiritual sword sanctuary. There, a group of warriors with visible signs of fatigue were panting and catching their breath. The clothing of these people bore the emblem symbolizing the righteous alliance. Hugh. Among these exhausted people, there was one who was slowly regulating his breathing, though not as tired as the others. It was Moyang Hak, the eldest son of the Moyang family. What could be the reason that even he, leading the righteous alliance warriors, was so exhausted? Moyang Hak raised his head and looked up at the trees. Why on earth is she doing this? In fact, he too didn't know the reason. Just because of her one word that they needed to hurry, they had to use their lightness skill without rest as soon as they left the spiritual sword sanctuary. Thanks to this, even he, with relatively solid internal energy, couldn't help but be exhausted. Meanwhile, someone landed in front of him. Thud. It was none other than Zhang Myong Sate of the Hangshan sect. She, who had descended with graceful body techniques, breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Ba. Fortunately, it seems there is no pursuit. At these words, Moyang-hak asked in a tone of incomprehension, "Pursuit? What do you mean by that, Satay? Don't tell me you did this because you thought that monster-like person might have set trackers on us?" "That's correct." "What?" He had thought it unlikely, but was it really because of that they had used their lightness skill recklessly as soon as they left the spiritual sword sanctuary? Satay. But didn't that person say with his own mouth? Righteous Alliance? Ah. I think I've heard of it. They say it's one of the three powers dividing the current martial world along with the Heaven and Earth Society and the Four Evils Alliance. Ba. That's correct. From the look in your eyes, you seem quite worried, monk. Not at all, patron. How could this humble monk do such a thing? Rather, I'm grateful that you've resolved the true culprit behind the Namgung family tragedy, which was a concern for our alliance. I didn't particularly do it for the Righteous Alliance, but if it helped you, then I suppose there's no need for us to be at odds with each other. Zhang Myong Satay also remembered the last words that person had said. He hadn't exactly spoken in a roundabout way. It clearly meant that they shouldn't create reasons to be at odds with each other. From their standpoint, they didn't particularly want to make him an enemy, so if the other party took the initiative like this, it wasn't bad. Moyang-hak had taken this at face value. He thought that the other party wouldn't want to be at odds with a huge organization like the Righteous Alliance either. But Zhang Myong Satay didn't take it so literally. Patron. Does "let's not create reasons to be at odds" sound purely friendly to you? Are you saying it has a different meaning? To this humble monk's ears, it sounded like he could handle it even if reasons to be at odds arose. What? I didn't say this at the scene because there were many ears listening and eyes watching, but this isn't something our alliance, no, the current martial world can simply overlook. Is it because a new peerless expert has appeared? It's not just a new expert. As you must have realized too, Patron Moyang, he will soon be called the Seventh Heaven by martial artists. At these words, Moyang-hak couldn't hide his excitement. The Seventh Heaven? You mean he'll become one of the seven heavens? It's not about becoming one. When this incident spreads, he will establish himself as a new heaven. He broke the 108 Arhat formation of Shaolin, called the birthplace of the orthodox sect's martial arts, with just one true enlightened step, and Master O Qianmu of the Spiritual Sword Sanctuary, one of the current martial world's 6 pinnacles, acknowledged defeat without even fighting, swearing loyalty after seeing the sword mark on the cliff. With just these 2 actions, he was already writing a legend surpassing the other 6 heavens. What she was worried about wasn't the emergence of this new powerhouse. An expert who has reached the realm of Grand Master has entered under someone stronger than him. Just that alone is already distorting the balance of power. Ah. At her meaningful words, Moyang-hak finally realized the seriousness of the situation. The problem was that the new powerhouse didn't just defeat an existing powerhouse, but subjugated him. An expert at the level of the 6 heavens was no different from a one-man sect by himself. Just by taking such a being under his wing, this person had essentially shattered the balance in the current martial world and created a new landscape. The fact that he subjugated Master O and took him under his wing, when he could have ended it with just a competition, means his actions might not end with simply making a name for himself. So that's why you were worried about pursuit. Yes, he might want to delay the spread of news about his actions. Satay. What is it? Thinking about it, isn't this even more serious? What do you mean? Doesn't the fact that he just let us, members of the Righteous Alliance, go mean that he doesn't care even if his actions become known? At these words from Moyang-hak, Zhang Myong Satay's expression became even more serious. This made sense. The opponent might be so confident that he doesn't even care if his actions are revealed to the Righteous Alliance's ears, or he might be ready to create a new order. To this, Zhang Myong Satay said, "This won't do. Patron, we need to hurry to a branch office to send a messenger bird, and then we should go straight to the Alliance's headquarters." This place, full of the smell of iron and still filled with heat, was Master O Qianmu's workshop. Many famous swords that made a name in the current martial world were born here. Among them, the sword that many swordsmen considered the best was Ilwi, the unique weapon of Zhang Haiyan, the leader of the Righteous Alliance. Zhang Haiyan, one of the six heavens, was known to have never been defeated since obtaining Ilwi, and O Qianmu's reputation as a craftsman soared to the heavens after that. Many people considered it a great wish to enter this place and ask O Qianmu to craft their unique weapon. Tap. Master O Qianmu, who had been examining the torn leather scabbard, put it down and said, "A leather scabbard will have difficulty withstanding the sword's sharpness." To these words, Mok Jianan shrugged and replied, "Yes, it was a bit precarious." He had somewhat expected this, as he always carried the sword. Master O Qianmu politely extended both hands. "I need to craft a scabbard suitable for the sword. May this lowly one examine the sword for a moment? Will you be all right?" "What do you mean?" "Evil Commandment sword is set to reveal its desires when touched by anyone other than me." "I see. So it's as I've heard." Master O Qianmu nodded and stared intently at the magic sword Evil Commandment sword. But that gaze was strangely bitter. It's a sword made by O Yezi, who could be considered his ancestor, so why is he looking at it with such eyes? What's wrong? Is there something wrong with the sword? Mok Jianan lifted the sword to examine it. What was surprising was that despite being so old and having absorbed much blood, the blade of the magic sword Evil Commandment sword was still sharp and without a single blemish. Even excellent iron would inevitably have its edge damaged after long use and clashing, so this was truly strange. Then O Qianmu brought thick work gloves and said, "That sword is made of a very special iron called Guanya black iron, so its blade probably won't be damaged until its lifespan is completely over." O Qianmu put on the gloves and extended both hands again. At this, Mok Jianan handed him the sword. If necessary, he could subdue him and take it back, and inwardly, he was also curious about what would happen if a peerless expert at the Grand Master level like him held Evil Commandment sword. Tap. O Qianmu received the sword while wearing gloves. The sword body trembled subtly. Although it wasn't in direct contact because of the gloves, it might be showing aversion to being in someone else's hands. But then, as O Qianmu injected true energy into the sword, woong woong woong. The sword's cry rang out, and the trembling of the sword body stopped. Did he subdue it? A strange light flickered in Mok Jianan's eyes. Indeed, perhaps because he had achieved the way of the sword, extreme of the sword, he seemed to be at a level where he could control even Evil Commandment sword's demonic nature. It wasn't for nothing that he was called one of the six heavens. Having suppressed the sword's spirit with his true energy, O Qianmu spoke in a bitter voice. A sword can be illuminated by itself, but truly, the element of a great sword is that it can make its owner shine the brightest. However, this sword has a nature completely opposite to that. To think there's a sword that drives its owner to the brink of death unless they can overcome its demonic nature. O Qianmu shook his head. Then, scanning the sword body with both eyes, he continued speaking. Our ancestor O Yezi said that making this and 4 other demonic swords was the most regrettable thing he did in his lifetime. 5 demonic swords. He said making them was shameful? Were there demonic swords other than Evil Commandment sword and plundering killing sword? More than that, it was unexpected to hear that he expressed shame after making the swords. This was because Mok Jianan quite liked Evil Commandment sword and plundering killing sword. Is it because they became demonic swords? That might be part of the reason, but the reason our ancestor regretted making these demonic swords lies elsewhere. What is it? To Mok Jianan's question, Master O Qianmu answered in a meaningful voice. It's because human flesh and blood, and their grudges, are imbued in these demonic swords. Is that so? For a moment, Master O Qianmu frowned. Is this really all the reaction he has?